Economic systems. I remind you of the complex set of interactions that we're now referring to in this holistic matter presented on the typology here that I've created for you. As you recall, subsistence patterns was a primary level of discussion that was we were attending to last chapter. Okay, now we're going to move over a little more towards exchange methods. Okay, and the different sorts of levels of exchange methods, be it gift for simpler societies, trade, and actual money at state level societies that we'll get into now. Now, as I said, Marcel Mauss, who was a very well-known anthropologist from some time ago, had this great quote, what power resides in a given object that causes its recipients to pay it back? He was a nephew of Durkheim, one of the three big sociologists who started anthropology. We like to say that. The book The Gift, was only his only major work, but it still has significant impact within anthropology to this day. There's deeper findings that people are finding value in it. As noted by Mauss, reciprocity, is considered not only an economic system. Birthday gifts, as I said before, have sentimental value and monetary value. In both cases, they're indexing or pointing at social relationships. Okay, and it's these social relationships that end up governing much of what we think about, much of what we do. It's not often, again, like I've said for much of the last chapter, and again I'm saying today, gifts are not what we typically think of them as. At the very least, they're a bit more than what we typically think. So, as I've said before, this question, keep it in the back of your head as we continue through this work. In Mauss's answer to this question, we can think of gift as a total presentation imbued with spiritual mechanisms, engaging the honor of both the giver and the receiver. So we can think of it as a rather big deal. The slides that I've shared with the class, there's a hyperlink here to a definition of what a total fact is, if you're a little more interested in the deeper sociology behind this. But partially why, if you reflected last week on why you might have been hurt when you gave something to someone and they did not give you something that had equal either economic or sentimental value, the hurt you might have felt there is linked to these deeper connections that Mauss and his research was getting at. So, the object is tied to the giver. These transactions is argued to transcend divisions. This spiritual, and material way that we talk about things in our complex society might sound silly to some extent. It might have been easier for a hunter-gatherer to refer to this as magic. There's a magical quality about this gift that we give to you. But we don't need to believe in magic to feel hurt. When you've been shamed by a gift, or if someone gave you way more than you gave them, or vice versa. The emotional ties that all of us have personally felt is relatively similar to what we're talking about here in terms of this notion of magic. And this idea that you're never completely cut off from the things that you've given to someone. So this notion of bond and social bond is a continuing, ongoing sort of issue. And this is the definition of why, if you unpack this theory a little deeper, why does one feel an obligation to return it back or to give in kind? It goes back to this original notion of, the obligation at the outset. So if we think of these obligations, and we can chop them up a little or cut them apart rather than just thinking of, oh, I feel guilty, I should have given that person a better gift. We can think of these obligations in three different forms: giving, receiving, and reciprocating. And in each case, there's a slightly different thing. And, of course, we know what it is to give and receive. This notion of reciprocating might be a little more complicated in the unpacking of this theory of Mauss's. Now, the nature of gifts can be ambiguous and to some extent political, as we see in the depiction here. And this was something probably in New York City, in the 1800s, in that with the Catholics in Ireland, or it might have been Ireland. I can't remember where the ad came from. This notion of gift often can be used in a negative sense. You can intentionally hurt someone, through this notion of gift. A little model I built here to help you understand what I'm trying to get at. Gift or exchange, in a sense, you can think of it as money. And in our society, often it is simply money. I have money, I worked hard for money, and I use the money to get something, and then it's mine. But exchange is a bit more complicated, okay? And I've just threw out a few examples here. It's gift, it's theft. I mean, that's a silly way of thinking about exchange. If someone steals something from you, it is a mode of exchange. They had it, and now, or you had it, and now they have it. But if we want to theoretically discuss exchange in the broadest sense, well, theft is part of exchange. If you invade from one country to another, kinship is another thing that is a manner of exchange. If you're related to someone, if you want your children to do something for you, if you're ashamed that your children will not obey you, well, this goes back to these notions of exchange. So, gifts are never free. I think Marcel Mauss clearly pointed it out, and I'm hoping that I'm beginning to convince you on this premise, that there is no such thing as a freely given gift. At least I haven't found one yet. Bronislaw Malinowski was one of the founders of functionalism, and he had a great example of one really complex example of reciprocity, of this exchange system writ large and in a very expansive tableau. Here we see a larger map of the area, the islands around New Guinea, and where these exchanges were happening with these people. And you can see the different circles, so they went in opposite circles. Now, to go on one of these adventures, imagine you're a young boy of just 15 and your dad finally invites you on the big adventure, of the Kula Ring exchange system. It's a huge deal. And it's not going to secure trade routes for you. It's not going to get you any great profits from these other lands if you're traveling from one island to another, But it is a high adventure. It could be part of a rite of passage, an adult ritual. And it's a high credibility back at home. All right, you went off on an adventure. You were invited to go off on an adventure. To exchange, these cowrie shells, ostensibly these things that have very little value. But the fact that you were invited to go on this adventure is a real honor from your village, and you earned that. You earn that overall, and so the reciprocity might work to some extent in that way. Now, this notion of gift, again, in simpler societies is easier to unpack maybe than it is in complex societies. But it is, the fundamental glue that holds these societies together. Everything, and as I said when we were discussing chapter 7 of our text, no one owns anything. There's no sense of private property. So if a group of men go off on a hunt and they bring back a deer, everyone who went off on the hunt deserves an equal portion. I mean, and ideally, maybe one of them hunted, one of them carried the water, one of them made the arrows, and one of them was the great shot that did it. But possibly that's not the case. Possibly two of them did nothing, but all of them deserve an equal portion because there's no such thing as real private property. So this notion of gift helps modulate for tempers sometimes. And this idea of total service, again, going back to this total fact, if you know, this consensual social, structural, and economic system, it's opposed to more modern theories of economics. Like if you're a business major, you might be thinking about rational calculations like, I shot that deer with my arrow. I deserve a bigger cut of the meat. Well, the danger for the hunter-gatherers, like we found out with the Bushman article, if one man were to challenge another man to that, and this man were kind of angry about it, they could end up in a fight that could kill one or both of them. And the whole society is going to suffer from that in the long run by one less hunter, one less person who brings back food and all that. So it's, and in a place without police, without, legal things like that, it becomes a very big issue. In complex societies, it's a little different. Gift exchange, it rises, where it's only in this case where these ideas where gifting can become competitive, where I can outgive you. I can give more than you gave, and then we can kind of boast about it in that. The potlatch, the example of the potlatch in the American Northwest is one of the best examples of it where it really goes over the top. Here we see a nice depiction of it, and this is again in Northwest Canada, the Kwakiutl Indians. The potlatch, and this is a modern image because it's still going on to some extent. It was an idea where different lineages, different tribes would be competing for the attentions of all, and of all of the younger men, let's say. Because if you would win them over to your potlatch, if you had one big party, after the hunt, after the season is done, basically, from all of the hunt, which is mainly salmon was a big part of their hunting, fishing, as it were. You had a robust harvest, and you have excess food, and you need to distribute that food. It will rot. You cannot just keep it to your lineage. So this clever mechanism that they had of giving these things away was throwing these huge parties. And to some extent, the idea was that the more you gave away, the more people would attend your party. And if they attended your party, they owed you service and respect for the following year. So then what it became is the competing clansmen would be trying to outdo each other year after year. Kind of like swag, if you imagine swag where you attend a party and you get some swag from the company. Imagine swag that becomes a three-piece suit, maybe a bicycle, maybe a small motorcycle, maybe enough food to feed your family for a month. Huge gifts end up becoming, life-saving sort of gifts sometimes end up becoming part of this party. So it reinforces, these notions of exchange, these notions of obligation. I honor you and your lineage. You have helped me. You helped me give the down payment so I could get married. And I owe you service for that. Maybe not in perpetuity, maybe just until the next potlatch season, at which point I may go to the other guy, and hence the competitive nature of it. So this, illustrates this notion, that basically, wealth, prominence through the giving away of their possessions. It's pretty much as simple as that. But it becomes really sticky when some societies end up getting really competitive about it, and they're doing it intentionally. And as I said when we discussed last chapter, when countries offer aid to each other, it can be out of shaming them rather than actually trying to help them. So it's a political maneuver rather than actually a gesture of friendship or communal sense. So again, the discussion question that I had from last chapter, I want to bring us back to the same discussion question. This eating Christmas in the Kalahari, which we discussed in last chapter, does this really illustrate this principle that there's no such thing as a free gift?